All right, so this is going to be another pretty packed and loaded video, right? Where we're going to go through one of, I would say, the most important workflows in DatoCMS, which is creating landing pages and working with pages. Now, I'm going to walk you through four very common approaches that we take when it comes to building our own website on datocms.com, as well as some of our starters to kind of showcase the different approaches. If you remember in one of the previous videos when we were creating blog posts together, we'd split that into two, right? We had one video where we were just zipping through one of the blog posts to kind of populate the model with content to show how that flow works. And we had a second one where we took a deep dive into the structured text editor to showcase all of the features and functionalities that we get with slash commands and so on as editors. But rather than splitting this into two, let's try and pack as much context as we can into one video where I'm going to walk you through four approaches, like I mentioned. The first one would be looking at the blog index page. Then we'd work with the case study index page, as well as resources, which is a new model I created in the background that's kind of focusing on things like ebooks and webinars and kind of other common resources we would have on websites when it comes to things like lead generation. And finally, we'll take a look at the example of a homepage focusing purely on the sort of drag and drop functionality or the page builder approach that you can have with modular content. So to put things a bit into context, the way we structure our own blog at DatoCMS with all of the posts listed chronologically is handled very differently to how you would expect in a CMS. The actual connection to the posts and the index page is not handled by the CMS at all. All of this is handled purely by code. So our blog index page kind of queries for all of our posts and lists them out chronologically. So as editors, we don't have the opportunity to make any errors, or we don't have the flexibility to connect posts to pages. It's just all automatic and it's handled directly on the front end. So we only create our blog posts, and as soon as it's published, we know for sure that it's going to be handled correctly and automatically on the index page. The second approach will take a look at something like case studies, right? So when it comes to success stories at DatoCMS, we have a case study model where we create these case studies, but we don't always want them to sort of appear chronologically as we have for the blog. We might want a little more flexibility in showcasing certain use cases or certain customers above another. So we use the functionality of links to kind of rearrange how these posts show on the case study index page. So when we take this approach, we'll do a little refactoring on the schema we built to kind of show how this approach would work. The third approach is for something like a grid where we have our starter projects, right? So here we kind of have one model in place to control the content of just the starters page, where we have the sort of slug, the title, and the description. And we have another way to sort of have an ordered list of records. So when we will be creating resources on this example, but this is where I'll show you how you can have multiple records of a content type and just have the option to drag and drop them, which would then be queried on the front end accordingly. And lastly, we'll jump our context away from our project into that of one of our starters, which is the sort of marketing website starter, where the entire homepage is built purely with modular content. So everything you see here, from the logo reel to the content blocks, the testimonials, even the hero, all of this is handled via individual blocks, which gives us a really nice editor-friendly visual page building experience, especially when we pair it with one of our plugins, which is something I will highlight as we move into that project. Cool. So now that we know the four approaches we're going to take, let's maybe get back into the CMS and start working with the very first one, which is the blog index. Now, the first thing you'll notice when I click on the blog index is I don't actually have to go ahead and select create a new record, which is something we had when we were creating case studies. This is because we had intentionally chosen to go for a single instance model, which means you can only have one record for this model. You can have multiple versions, you can make edits and so on, you can have localizations and everything as you would expect, but you would only be able to create one blog index. This is because it would be, I would say, a sort of parent page where we only want /blog, and we don't want multiple records of the same page. So here we're gonna try and sort of highlight how this process looks like, very similar to our own, where we've got everything handled by code, which means in the CMS we literally only need to have things like our title. This is our blog for a description, and maybe we'll go ahead and choose a featured image, which is our OG image. This is also where we might want to control the slug. Now, a common reason you would have control over this as an editor is for things like localizations, right? Maybe in English it's called blog, but on the German version you want to change this to magazine and so on. You could also have the option to not give this field to the editors at all and have the slug auto-generated from the title and kind of hard-coded. But just to give you a little bit of an example on how very specific fields can be changed, we'll go ahead and localize the slug field. So I'm going to go ahead and save this and even publish it. Now, what you notice is I have done nothing with the actual blog post itself, because we as editors don't want control over how blog posts are connected to the index page. This is all going to be handled on the front end. So it's a very minimal, simple process to build out what an index page could be, where we only have control over changes made to the title and the description and the the featured image for any future iterations, but we have absolutely no control on changing the order in which the blog posts are sort of generated. So now that we've gotten a look at the, I would say, simplest approach to generating a page, let's jump over to the case study index. When we were modeling this out, we wanted the title, which was case studies, to be shown for us internally and generate a slug. But we'd also given ourselves the option to only create a hero. So maybe this is where we can say something like, these are our success stories and our customers are awesome. We'll also go ahead and just choose the same placeholder image for now, so we kind of can visualize what this hero would look like. And if we wanted to go ahead with, having blocks within blocks, we could also go ahead and add a little CTA, which could say something like, get in touch to replicate this success for you, with going to something like, contact us. And maybe we can set a little color for the CTA, which is not going to be accurate, but somewhere close to Dato Orange. So I'll go ahead and save this. But we've changed our mind. We don't want to automatically query all of our case studies and have them listed chronologically or alphabetically. We want a little more control over this. So let's take an approach to try and get all of the case studies we've created onto the case study index. Now, in the background, I did create a few dummy case studies with just the title, since we worked together in creating the first one. So let's jump back into our schema for the case study index page and add a new field for links. Now, we're going to choose multiple links here, which is a little different from how we treated the connections between an author and the blog post, because we want to list out all, if not multiple, of our case studies. So I'm going to go ahead, create a case study link field, and under the validation, I'm going to make sure I'm only accepting case studies. I could also choose to have a specific number of records, but let's leave this as it is. Now, links can appear in two ways. You can have a compact view and an expanded view when you're sort of building out pages. So let's start off with the compact view, but we'll take a look at how both work. Now that we've got this in place, let's jump back into content editing, and let's just go ahead and start linking our case studies. Now, if we wanted to create one, very similar to how we've seen modular content work, how we've seen links work in the past, we could just create one from here itself. But in the background, like I said, I have created a few. So let's go ahead and sort of link all these records in. And just like that, once I go ahead and save this, when the page is being queried, we're going to have these case studies appear in this order. Maybe I want to change it. Maybe I want an enterprise logo to come first. I can go ahead and drag and drop and save this. And there we go. But I'm still not very happy with how things look. I mean, I can just see the title, but maybe I want a little more context, right? So we'd selected the compact view for how this would appear to us as editors. So maybe let's change this, get a little more breathing room. Now, fun fact, if you hover over the field, you can actually jump into the schema and make a quick edit there. So let's take the expanded view and get back to content editing. Now, the first thing you'll notice is we have a little more breathing room, right? We've got the sort of model association showing along with its published status, and we can just have a little more clarity on how things are looking. So now that I have this in place and I have a better idea of what I want to change, I want, don't want to edit that. I just want to drag the really specific use case higher up. And since all the gains is one of the oldest we created, I want that to show up last. So as before, I'll go ahead and save this. And now how this works is on the front end, whenever we're rebuilding the website or queries are being queried, this is the order in which they would appear. If I make any changes, that would be reflected on the front end as well. Cool. So that's the second approach. Now, for the third approach, we're going to take a quick look at what an ordered list of records would look like. Now, a use case for this would be when you don't want to use links, right? So links are not theoretically, they're practically used when you want to rearrange subsets of fields. But here we've just got something very similar to blog posts and case studies where we've just got a bunch of records. We don't really want to, create another page, link them, so on and so forth. We just want this control on that content type itself. So if I take a look at the resources I've created for things like ebooks and webinars, this is a layout that's very similar to the blog. But again, the only options I have for sorting these are like we had before, where I could just, use these toggles. But that's not helping me for the front end. So we're going to jump back into the schema and we're going to take a look at the resources here. If I go into editing the model and jumping into the settings, this is where you've got a little selection for how you'd like to order these records. So we briefly touched upon this in the past when we were, going through validations and introducing all the different field types. But here is where I would choose something in terms of how they should be sorted. So I could maybe have them sorted alphabetically based on their fields, like everything from A to Z, for example, which is not really how I want resources to show up. Or I can give myself the option to drag and drop. So once I go ahead and save this model and I go back to content editing, you're going to notice that we already have a different layout here with this sort of selector for how you want these to appear. Now, let's assume I have a resources page that's querying for all of these, very similar to the blog index. Very similar to the case study index, but rather than using links, I'm just going to go ahead and drag and drop all of these records. And every time I make a change, these are successfully being reordered. What this means is on the front end, when queries for resources are running, they're kind of automatically going to be updated. I don't have to do any saves. I don't have to do any publish changes. It's just a change in the arrangement here is going to take care of everything. And there we have it. That's the three approaches that are kind of a little more, content view heavy. Now, finally, for unlocking or revealing the power of modular content, we'd said we wanted to work with the home page where we only have blocks and we're only going to use the modular content field. But rather than you sort of watching me build out content in silence again, I thought it would be great to jump back into the marketing starter, which my colleague Marcello's built out recently, which completely uses modular content. It's an incredibly well-built layout. So if you want to play around with it yourself, I'd highly recommend, maybe starting a new project with either the e-commerce or the marketing website starter, where you can have your own kind of drag and drop experience with modular content. So let's jump into another project I've created using this starter. And the first thing you notice is the homepage is very similar to how we'd modeled it ourselves. We're only accepting blocks here. Sure, we've got a label for what we want this to be internally, and we've got the SEO and readability analysis, but there's no other fields for editing content. So once we take a look at things like the hero, where we've also got another plugin to look at sort of visual layouts, we've got things like the brands, the video, the features, the testimonials, everything we saw on the homepage. But I'm not happy with how this looks, and I want a more visual way to sort of, see the changes I'm working on almost in real time before I push anything to the website. So let's go ahead and expand the content record view. Now, one thing you'd notice is we have a little toggle here. That's because we're working with this one very particular plugin, which gives us web previews, which is something that's installed on this project. And what this offers us is the ability to have side-by-side web previews between the content editing and what our front end actually looks like in production. So let's go ahead and make some changes now. What would break this layout? Maybe we want to show our brands. We want to show our brands above the homepage. We want to bring our testimonial all the way high up here because we want to flex what customers think about us first. And we don't care so much about pricing. Let's move that to the bottom. And let's go ahead and save this. Now, the moment I do that, the record is updated, but there's no changes to the actual preview. That's because by default, we're calling for the scheduled version, for the published version. But since the changes I've made are just on the draft stage and not published, I'm going to go ahead and change to the draft version of our website. And the first thing you can see is that I've ruined everything. I mean, sure, you're not supposed to have logos all the way up and the hero layouts and stuff like that. But every time I make a change, without any refreshes, I'm going to see these appear in real time. So if I were to go and bring things back to normalcy with the hero on top and sure, testimonials after, and go ahead and save this, I'm not even going to have to refresh the page, but it's just going to instantly sort of show me all of the changes. This also works when working with sort of different plugins, right? So I briefly mentioned we're using a plugin for the visual variation of the hero. If I wanted to go ahead and go away from the background image to maybe, let's go with the gradient. I'm going to select the gradient. If I wanted to make any changes here, I could just edit the text as required. And very similarly, save it. And that's going to query for the changes almost instantly. And that's kind of the power with modular content, right? We as editors get a very visual drag and drop page builder layout that we're familiar with and something that gives us a very visual way of working. So we're not kind of making changes in the CMS and hoping everything works as expected. We see exactly what we're changing. It's a very what you see is what you get experience. And that's been kind of a quick walkthrough into 4 approaches that we take when it comes to page generation at Dato, right? We've seen how you can create pages that have almost little to no control in the CMS, but are purely handled on the front end to give very sort of restrictive guidelines to us to not make any errors. We've taken a look at how we can use links to rearrange entries as we like when we're working with an index that's related to another set of records. We've taken a look at how we can just rearrange records themselves when we don't want to create another model to link to a subset of fields. And finally, we've taken a look at how sort of modular content works when we want to have all of these visual blocks to work with. And that's been a very quick walkthrough on page generation and deep dive into modular content when working within Dato.